It all began with a box, an old one. Aged by decades, edges frayed and corners softened by time. A thin veil of dust clung to its surface, like it had been forgotten by the world. And perhaps it had. It was discovered purely by chance. Tucked away in the attic of a modest house in Virginia Beach, the very town where Edgar Cayce had spent most of his life. And in that place, where whispers of his name still echo, where his legacy of visions and prophecies lingers like a faint aftertaste in the air, this box appeared. But what made it extraordinary wasn't how it looked, it was what it contained. Inside was a folder, carefully wrapped in faded cloth, and beside it, an envelope marked with a chilling instruction, to be opened only after 70 years. No name, no sender, no seal, but someone gave in to curiosity. Someone, at some point, opened it. Perhaps they shouldn't have, yet they did, and now, what was inside has seeped into the dark edges of the internet. It appears and disappears, shared in secret, deleted mysteriously, only to resurface like a ghost that refuses to rest. Some claim they caught a glimpse once. Just once. Others say it's a fake, a clever forgery. But those who truly know Cayce, who have studied his voice, his calm and cryptic tone, that steady serenity even in the face of unsettling truths, they swear it's real. They say it's the transcript of a private interview, one never meant to be heard by the public. The recording, believed to be made in 1944, just months before Cayce's death, reveals a conversation between him and an unnamed visitor. Not a journalist, not a scientist, just someone who clearly knew what to ask and wasn't afraid of the answers. The subject of their conversation? The 7 levels after death, a journey. Cayce said that every soul must undertake after shedding its physical body. But what shocked even his most loyal followers was not just the structure of the afterlife. It was that Cayce began to speak of the future. Not some distant, abstract future. Our future. Yours. Mine. Everything we think we know about death? Cayce claimed it's merely a curtain. A performance. A carefully constructed illusion. The real journey, he warned, starts afterward, and no one is prepared. That's how the transcript begins. Cayce describes the first level as transitional. A place where the soul wakes up, dazed and uncertain. It's like trying to move through water as thick as syrup. Every motion slow, every thought unclear. At this stage, most souls don't even realize they're dead. They're confused. They look for the light. But all they see are flickering shadows of the fears they carried in life. Some souls remain trapped here for decades, wandering, repeating, searching for something they can't quite name. Then comes the second level, reflection. And here, something even more profound takes place. You are shown your life once more. But not through your eyes. Through the eyes of those you touched. You feel the sorrow you caused. The joy you gave. The moments you never knew mattered. According to Cayce, this is the most painful stage. And yet, it's the most crucial. It is here, in the depths of this mirrored reliving, that either repentance is born, or the soul dissolves into final oblivion. Then comes the third level, awareness. At this point, the soul starts to grasp the architecture of existence. It begins to understand. It encounters beings of light, guides. Cayce called them, not speaking with voices, but communicating through vivid images, rushing memories, and waves of pure energy. Many who return from near-death experiences, those who come back with strange wisdom, prophetic dreams, or unshakable calm, they are said to have reached this level. They are the dreamers who awaken in the middle of the dream, like Cayce himself once did. But beyond this point, the path grows dim, mysterious, dangerous. The fourth level begins the descent into what Cayce hinted were the forbidden realms. Very few ever reach them. Why? Cayce doesn't say. Or maybe, he can't. Some truths, perhaps, are simply too vast for words. Yet what he does reveal about the fourth level is enough to disturb even the most skeptical listener. Because here is where the most terrifying part begins. Not because this is where you'll find hell, but because this is where you'll find truth. The unfiltered, searing truth about yourself. He named this place the Mirror Corridor. And what lies within its endless reflections will shift not only how you view death, but how you live your life. Here, Cayce explained, the soul no longer sees just its life as it was. It begins to see what it could have been. And he was clear. This wasn't poetic, nor symbolic. It wasn't a metaphor. It was an unfiltered, soul-deep experience of all the possible paths that had been available during life on Earth, paths that were never taken. Some because of fear, others due to distraction, doubt, or even comfort. And yet, each of these paths doesn't vanish. They don't dissolve into imagination. According to Cayce, they exist, fully formed, like alternate versions of you still moving somewhere within a vast, unseen spiritual architecture. In one of them, you forgave someone you never could in your real life. In another, you chose revenge, and carried it through to its bitter end. In a third, you renounced the world and entered a monastery, leaving behind all worldly desires. In a fourth, you committed a crime you never actually committed, but perhaps once considered. And the most chilling part of all? Every one of these versions of you is alive. Not in the physical sense, but in what Cayce called the realm of spirit, where every decision made or unmade branches outward, not into abstract what-ifs, but into energy forms that actually exist, vibrating within a shared spiritual field. This, he said, is the mirror corridor, and it's not just a corridor of memory. It's a corridor of potential. In this place, the soul no longer feels judged by some external God, some celestial courtroom. Here, Cayce said, God is not a judge, but a witness. And the only one who passes judgment is you. Some souls, he admitted, cannot bear it. They ask to go back. They pled to return to the physical world, to forget what they've seen, to hide from their own possibilities. But others push forward. And so they arrive at the fifth level, which Cayce called infinite time. At this stage, the boundaries of time collapse. There's no past, no future, no linear ticking of seconds. Instead, everything, what has been, what is, and what may come, folds into a single, eternal layer. It was here, Cayce said, that he received his prophecies. Not as visions playing like a movie, but as waves, an ocean of probabilities, pulsing and shifting. And within that ocean, he noticed dense knots of energy, clusters so tightly woven that they seemed nearly unchangeable. These, he believed, were inevitable events. One such knot, he warned, was forming in the mid-21st century. He never spelled out precisely what would occur, but his descriptions were unnervingly specific. Cities plunged into darkness, people wandering in white masks, children born already remembering past lives, entire nations vanishing, not through war, but through the quiet collapse of meaning itself. And he believed all of this would stem from how humanity, as a whole, navigates its third level, the level of awareness. Because in Cayce's view, the world itself is a living soul. And like every individual, it too must pass through stages after death. He claimed that right now, humanity is hovering at the edge of its own third level. And ahead lies only two paths: enlightenment, or self-denial. Then comes the sixth level, which Cayce referred to as the separation of the shadow. This is where the soul begins to shed everything that is not its true self. All pain, all fear, all pride and envy. It doesn't destroy these things. It lets them go. Imagine stripping yourself to the very core. Not flesh, not bone, but something deeper. You strip down to light. That's how Cayce described it. And it's only in this state, this pure and unburdened condition, that the soul can begin to touch what we might call God. Or perhaps a higher intelligence. Or maybe, just maybe, it's yourself. From the future. And then comes the seventh level. But here, Cayce stopped. The transcript trails off in the middle of a sentence. A long pause. Then, 2 pages later, a single chilling line appears. I cannot speak about it. I am not allowed. Who silenced him? Why was this knowledge off limits? Why would this level, above all others, be forbidden from explanation? Some researchers believe this is where the cycle ends. That the seventh level is an exit, a point of return to something so vast, so otherworldly, that we can't even imagine it. Others suspect that Cayce saw something too powerful, too disorienting, something that might drive anyone who glimpsed it into madness. And yet, this is where things take a turn. Because right after this silence, Cayce begins to speak of something else. Something perhaps even more urgent. He begins to warn us. He called them the traps of the future. And no, he said, They are not rooted in technology. They are not nuclear wars. Not pandemics. Not natural catastrophes. The true trap, Cayce claimed, is something far more subtle. It is the forgetting of the spirit. He said that humanity is standing at the edge of a repeating trial, a pattern that has returned every few thousand years. And each time, civilization either awakens, or it falls into oblivion. He spoke of Atlantis, of the Sumerians, of Egypt before the dynasties. Ancient cultures that, according to Cayce, all knew of the 7 levels. But somewhere along the way, Cayce said, these ancient civilizations made a deliberate choice. They didn't just forget the truth by accident. They chose to forget. Why? Because the truth, in its rawest form, was too heavy to carry. When a person fully realizes that they are immortal, one of 2 things happens. They either become light, or they descend into madness. There is no middle ground. And so, rather than face that unbearable weight, they turned away. They allowed the sacred knowledge to slip into silence. They buried it beneath myths, rituals, and distractions. But Cayce warned that humanity is now standing at that same precipice, once again facing the same decision. He repeated one of his most haunting truths. The future is not programmed. It is built in every moment. Every thought, every act, every intention, it all matters. And right now, Cayce believed, we are choosing between 2 paths. One that leads toward a soulless technocracy, and another that leads us back to the source. In his vision of the near future, especially around the middle of the 21st century, he foresaw the emergence of a new kind of human. Not different in body, but in consciousness. These individuals would no longer perceive life, time, energy, and death in the way others do. They would be awake, like Cayce himself. They would have direct access to the 3rd level of awareness. They would remember past incarnations. They would feel the pain of others as their own. And they would see events before they occurred, not as guesses, but as vivid certainties. But such power, Cayce warned, would not go unnoticed. He predicted a worldwide attempt to suppress these people, not because they pose a threat to the world, but because they threaten the system. And so, he described 3 phases of resistance that this new generation would inevitably face. First, they would be ridiculed. They'd be mocked, labeled as delusional, mystical fanatics, charlatans, dismissed by the media, rejected by science. Second, they would face isolation. Institutions would rise, under the banners of science and mental health, to diagnose and treat them. All under the pretense of care, of protection. Third, they would encounter temptation. They would be offered power, fame, money, recognition. But the price would be steep. They would have to deny their spirit, abandon their deeper truth, bury their connection to the source. Only those who understood that they are not their body, not their name, not their profession, but rather a flow, a light, a mind beyond time, only they would pass through all 3 phases. And it's here that Cayce returned, in a roundabout way, to the 7th level. Not directly, he never spoke of it plainly, but through an image. He described a door, one that cannot be opened from the outside, a threshold that can only be passed when the soul stops wanting to enter it. Because even that desire to enter, Cayce said, is rooted in fear. And beyond the door? Nothing you can describe, no shape, no word, no meaning, only silence. And yet, within that silence, everything. The unknown interviewer asked, have you been there? There was no answer, only a long pause. Then finally, I almost didn't come back. Some believe it was after this session that Cayce's health began to collapse. That something in him broke. That he'd gone too far into a realm that human minds aren't meant to express. And he lost part of himself trying to bring its truth back with him. It was after this that he began writing what would become his final prophecies. The ones that were never published. The ones people whisper about. The ones that were said to have been stored inside that same old box, those yellowing pages. The ink blurred with age and time. Some even claim those words weren't written by Cayce's conscious mind at all. That he dictated them while in a deep trance, speaking from an altered state. And afterward, he didn't remember what he had said. The writings begin with a cryptic instruction. When you hear the voice from within, do not argue. It is older than you. What follows is not structured prose, not clean predictions or clinical analysis. It's fragments, symbols, images, lines so poetic they seem almost mad. Many scholars have dismissed these pages as incoherent nonsense. But those who study altered states of consciousness, who explore transcendental practices, believe otherwise. They believe Cayce encoded a truth beyond logic, one that can only be understood by the soul. One passage reads, "In the year when water touches the sky, and the earth begins to sing, a crack will open between worlds. Through it will come not the dead, but the forgotten." Who are the forgotten? What does "water touches the sky" even mean? Some interpret it as a warning of climate catastrophes. Others believe it speaks of data saturation, where we drown the soul in information and forget who we are. But the most disturbing image is of the crack, the interworld. A space where the boundary between the living and the souls stuck in the fourth or fifth level begins to break down. According to Cayce, these trapped souls aren't looking for new bodies. They're looking for consciousness, for minds they can speak through, act through, influence. And he warned that in the 21st century, there would be a sharp increase in people reporting voices that no one else could hear, dreams that come true, sensations that defy explanation. They'll be diagnosed, handed pills, quietly isolated, but not because they're ill, not because something is wrong with them, but because they are the threshold, the fragile, flickering line between this world and the next. Cayce's transcript takes another sharp turn here, veering into a prophecy that most people have never heard. Why? Because it was scrubbed, crossed out from nearly all the versions that were published. It begins with an unfinished phrase, "when the third continent disappears." But it stops. No explanation, no name, no detail. What continent? Australia? Greenland? Or was it something more symbolic, something less physical and more spiritual? Some believe it refers to the European soul, to the quiet erosion of faith, the fading connection to origin, the dimming of meaning. Cayce tied this slow unraveling to two signs: the silence of the churches, and the helplessness of science. He wrote, "When scientists begin to speak like priests, and priests like bureaucrats, listen only to the children, they still remember." And in that single haunting line, the purpose becomes clear. This is about remembrance, a return to what we knew before we were born. Cayce claimed that every child under 5 years old still holds the memory of their journey between the levels. They remember the passage, the light, the silence, but that memory is erased by school, by fear, by rules. Yet he left a possibility. If, one day, a generation arises that retains this memory, the world could change in a single generation. The final page of the document was unlike the rest. It was tucked away separately, written on thick parchment-like paper. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably his. At the bottom, 2 letters, EC. It wasn't a conclusion, it was a choice. He wrote, "If you are reading this, it means you have already heard the call. And now, you have a choice. But remember, knowledge changes you forever." It wasn't just a message, it was a warning. According to legend, right after reading those words, the person who found the box disappeared. Some say he traveled to Tibet, seeking deeper answers. Others claim he was found dead, and his body was strangely distorted, marked by something no medical examiner could explain. But most researchers say nothing. They simply refuse to comment. Or they say, quietly, "I don't want to talk about it." So, what was all of this? Were the 7 levels just symbolic? Cayce said no. They are not allegories, not religious metaphors, not myths. They are a map, a guide through the afterlife. But more than that, they are a map of what is happening right now. Cayce insisted that when we die, we don't go to a new place. We simply reveal what was already inside us. Each of the 7 levels? They exist in life, too. You can spend your whole life trapped on level 1. Drifting, disconnected, like you're in a dream you can't wake from, never fully noticing yourself. You can step into level 2 and begin to feel the sorrow or joy of others as your own. You might touch level 3 and suddenly see the threads, how everything connects, how nothing is random. But beyond that, only if you are ready. That's what Cayce's final prophecy was about. A time when the gates open from within. Not for everyone. Not for the masses. But for those who remember. Not those who believe. Those who remember. And they will be ordinary people. No mantras. No rituals. No robes or temples. One will be a bus driver. Another, a cashier. Another, a single mother. They will not need to speak to understand one another. They'll hear each other in silence. They'll meet in dreams. They'll find one another through a string of coincidences too precise to be chance. They will begin to feel what cannot be explained. And they will know. Death is not the end. It is the beginning. The future is not a line. It is a mirror. The truth is not outside of us. It is us, without fear. And above all, they will remember, we are not alone. We never were. The souls who passed through all 7 levels? They remain close, not as ghosts, but as light, as warmth, as conscience, as signs. So when you sit in silence, and suddenly feel that you're not alone, that's not your imagination. That's your signal. Those who have studied Cayce's message believe one thing with certainty. He left us a key, a map, and a warning. But he didn't leave it for everyone. Only for those willing to release the world as they know it. So they can remember the real one. This kind of truth, it doesn't air on television. It's not taught in schools. It gets removed from YouTube. Ignored by science. Mocked by media. But it survives. In fragments. In whispers. In memory. In you. And now that you've read this, you are no longer the person you were before. So now, there is only one question. Will you return to the old dream? Or will you go further? If something in this message stirred something deep inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a like, not for the algorithm, but as a signal. I have awakened. Subscribe if you feel ready to continue the journey. Because there is more, so much more, things that are never spoken aloud. Share this video with someone who's ready to hear it. Because the time has come. And those who see, must find each other. Here, now.